On the night of July 9, 1958, a magnitude 7.9 earthquake hit the Fairweather Fault at the head of Lituya Bay, Alaska. 30 million cubic meters of rock fell from 900 meters into the North Arm. The wave that came out of it was 524 meters high, the tallest wave ever recorded in the history of this planet. Howard Ulrich was anchored in the bay, with his 8-year-old son asleep below deck. He couldn't pull anchor in time. The chain held his bow into the water as the wave lifted the boat over the entrance spit and dropped it in the open gulf on the other side. His son woke up in open ocean. Both survived. A second couple in a third boat was not found. Not their bodies, not any trace. The wave had stripped both walls of the bay from the waterline to that 524-meter mark in the time it took to cross 12 kilometers of water. Old-growth forest that had stood for centuries was gone in under 2 minutes. The bare rock where the trees were is still there. And the bay had done something close to this, at least 4 times before anyone thought to classify it as a hazard. First thing in the file. Lituya Bay is a T-shaped fjord on the Gulf of Alaska coast, roughly 12 kilometers long and up to 3 kilometers wide, with a narrow spit at its mouth called La Chaussée, and 2 glacially carved arms reaching inland at the northern end. The Fairweather Fault, one of the most seismically active transform faults in North America, runs directly through the head of that northern arm. The walls above the fault trace are oversteepened by glacial erosion, loaded with rock that has been undercut and destabilized for thousands of years. The earthquake that hit it on the night of July 9th didn't find a stable slope. It found one that had been failing incrementally for centuries and needed only the right tremor to finish the job. The displacement wave that came out of the rockslide moved the full length of the inlet toward the open ocean in under 2 minutes. The sound of the impact was heard at the cannery at Dry Bay, roughly 100 kilometers away. Aerial crews who reached the area within hours described the water surface still in violent motion, white across most of its width, with the fresh, bare scar visible on both slopes as a clean boundary between stripped rock below and intact forest above. That boundary was not a gradual transition. It was a line. The water had reached exactly that height, traveled along the slope at that height, and stopped at that height. Below it, the trees were gone. Above it, nothing had moved. Second thing in the file. 3 fishing boats were in the bay that night. 5 people survived. 2 did not. So the measured height explains the scale of what happened. It doesn't explain why a fjord with a geological record of producing comparable waves at least 4 times in the preceding 105 years was still classified as a routine anchorage in the navigation literature available to boats seeking shelter there. I cross-referenced the USGS Geological Survey files completed in the early 1950s against the bare scars left on the slopes by prior wave events. Those scars were on the walls before July 9th. Someone had read and recorded them. The question is what designation that documentation produced. You'd assume a fjord with a physical record of repeatedly stripping its own slopes with exceptional waves would carry some form of active warning in the materials a captain would consult before sheltering there. The problem this case opens on is the gap between what the geological record showed and how that record was categorized, and what that categorization cost on a specific evening in July. So here's the actual question in this file. Not how the wave reached that height. The mechanism has been understood since the event itself. The question is, why a repeating geological pattern, confirmed in the rock of the inlet's own walls before July 9th, was filed as geology rather than hazard, and what the difference between those two categories means when a boat is tied up at the wrong end of a fjord that has been practicing this for well over a century. There's one document in this file I haven't shown yet. It predates the wave. It describes, in field geology language, exactly what this place was capable of producing. By the time I lay it alongside the 1958 measurement, it will speak without further explanation. To understand why July 9th was physically inevitable, you have to understand what glaciation did to the walls above the northern reach of the bay. I traced the glacial history of the Lituya region through the published geological literature. The fjord itself is a glacially scoured trough, carved by ice moving seaward, the walls cut steeper than the natural angle of the rock's own stability. When glaciers retreat, they leave hillsides that are over-consolidated. The ice that had been pressing against them from below is gone, and the rock is left at angles it cannot hold without support. The rock at the Lituya headwall is primarily greywacke and phyllite, metamorphic materials that break in planar fractures under repeated seismic stress. Each earthquake along the Fairweather Fault extends those fractures. Each winter's freeze-thaw cycle opens them slightly further. The process has been ongoing since the last glacial period, and it has been accelerating. Surveys conducted after 1958 documented continued destabilization of the headwall as the glaciers retreated further and removed the last ice contact support from sections of the slope. The rock above that northern arm is in worse condition now than it was the night the wave happened. The mechanism has not been interrupted. The inlet's dangerous history extends further back than the wave record alone captures. The French explorer Jean-François de Gallo de la Pérouse reached Lituya Bay in July of 1786 and produced the first detailed written description of the fjord. He sent 2 small boats ahead to survey the entrance before committing his larger vessels. The boats were caught in the tidal bore at La Chaussée and capsized. 21 men drowned in sight of the expedition. La Pérouse recorded the tidal currents at the entrance as treacherous beyond any he had encountered on the Pacific voyage, capable of overturning a ship's boat with no weather warning. His account circulated among Pacific navigators. The entrance spit bears his name. The bore current he described still runs the same exchange between the inner basin and the open gulf on every tidal cycle. The warning he left was about the entrance, not about the walls above it. The danger those walls represented had no name in 1786 and would not have one until the geologist who surveyed them gave it one 174 years later. I traced the documented wave history through the USGS field records and the pre-event survey work of Don Miller, a geologist who spent the early 1950s mapping Lituya Bay's geology and recording the bare vegetation lines left by prior wave events. By the time his field work was complete, he had identified at least 4 separate events since 1853. A scar at roughly 120 meters dating to 1853, a less precisely dated event in 1874, one in 1899, and the 1936 event, which left a stripped zone at approximately 150 meters on the opposite wall of the northern reach. 4 events in 105 years, the slopes above them still loaded, the fault still moving. The pattern already visible in the rock before anyone with authority to change the bay's designation had read it. On the night of July 9th, Howard Ulrich was anchored near Cenotaph Island aboard his fishing vessel, the Edry, with his 8-year-old son, Howard Jr. At 10:15, the earthquake arrived. Ulrich described watching the North Arm's wall detach, not crumble progressively, but separate in a single coherent event, a mass of rock dropping as a unit into the water below. He heard a sound he described as a detonation. Then the water at the head of the bay pulled back, drawn into the displacement, and the wave came down the full length of the inlet. He estimated the face of it at over 100 meters when it reached his position. The anchor chain held the bow of the Edry pointed toward the wave as it lifted the boat. That orientation was the mechanical fact that saved 2 lives. A vessel hit broadside by a wall of water moving at that speed has no structural tolerance for the lateral load. A vessel pointed bow on redirects the force upward along the hull's length. Ulrich had been actively trying to release the chain when the wave arrived. The line he couldn't free kept his bow into the water that would have killed him if it had met him sideways. The Edry was lifted, cleared the top of the entrance spit at roughly 8 meters above its surface, and settled into the Gulf side. Both Ulrichs were alive. A Coast Guard vessel found them in open water approximately 2 hours after the earthquake. Ulrich's initial report described a wave he estimated at several hundred feet. The figure was so far outside any previously recorded wave height that the first communications relaying his account back to the USGS used qualified language, reported by survivor, rather than confirmed. The aerial photographs and ground survey measurements taken in the weeks that followed confirmed that his estimate, made while watching his boat clear a mountain of water in the dark, was accurate, within an order of magnitude of exact. A second vessel, the Sunmore, anchored nearer the entrance, was carried over the spit as well. Bill and Vivian Swanson survived. The third vessel, the Badger, was moored in a small cove on the south shore. Orville and Mickey Wagner were aboard. The Badger was found beached on the spit after the water receded. The Wagners were never found. The cove geometry presented the wave at an angle that offered no equivalent to the bow-on orientation the chain had given the Edry. The water at the south shore, while considerably lower than the maximum, was still well above the tolerance of a wooden fishing boat caught broadside in an enclosed space. The survey teams who reached Lituya Bay in the weeks after documented the aftermath in precise detail. The head wall showed a fresh, pale scar where the rockslide had separated from the slope. The bottom of the northern reach was partially filled with deposited material, the seafloor measurably raised. The forest on both sides of the main inlet had been stripped to a consistent elevation with a uniformity that only a single wavefront moving at one height across a slope can produce. Ground-level photographs from that period show a horizontal band running around the entire perimeter where the vegetation stops, perfectly level across ridges and re-entrance alike, because the water that made it was at one elevation and held there. The trees weren't knocked over. They were removed, carried out through the entrance, and deposited in open water as floating debris fields that Coast Guard vessels navigated through when they first entered the area. Above that line, the forest was undisturbed. A bird nesting at 525 meters above sea level that night would not have known the wave had passed. I wasn't looking for the next piece of this file when I found it. I was checking sediment core data from research conducted after Miller's foundational paper, and what the cores showed was wave event layering extending substantially before 1853. Multiple distinct high-energy depositional layers appear at intervals suggesting events recurring across hundreds of years of pre-instrumental history. The 4 events established from written records were not the start of the pattern. They were the most recent entries in a sequence the inlet had been building since before any European recorded seeing it. The official framing of the 1958 event leaned heavily on the word unprecedented. I dug into what was on the record before July 9th to test that framing directly. The 1936 event is where it breaks down. In October of 1936, a wave in Lituya Bay reached approximately 150 meters on the slope of the northern reach. That is more than twice the height of any tsunami in the 20th century Pacific record outside this specific inlet. At least 2 fishing vessels were in the bay at the time. Both escaped through the entrance as the water moved toward it, and both crews reported the event to maritime authorities. The accounts described a sudden rise at the north end, followed by a wave moving down the length of the fjord at high speed. It was entered into the geological record as a confirmed wave event with an estimated run-up of 150 meters. The USGS had that record of a 150-meter wave in this specific anchorage 22 years before 1958. The unprecedented characterization referred accurately to the record height. That specific figure had no precedent anywhere. The mechanism, the category, the repeating pattern, none of those were unprecedented. They were on file. The difference is not semantic. It is the difference between a bay that surprised everyone and a bay that had given explicit advance notice of what it could do. Quick aside, because the document this case has been building toward is next, the pre-event survey and the 1958 measurement side by side. Back to the file. If you're drawn to what the planet's own record says about itself, subscribing puts more of these in front of you. Miller's pre-event survey, completed before July 9th, recorded bare scars at approximately 120 meters from 1853, at a lower elevation from 1899, and at 150 meters from 1936. It cataloged the fair weather fault running through the headwall, the over-steepened glacially scoured walls, and fractured rock above the waterline at multiple points along the northern reach. In the language of its own discipline, the report accurately identified the inlet as geologically active, with a history of high-magnitude wave generation. That description, in plain terms, is a description of a repeating hazard. The survey was filed as a geological field report. It was not cross-referenced to navigational literature. It was not used to change the designation of the anchorage in any document a captain planning to shelter there would have consulted. The report that described exactly what Lituya Bay was capable of, written from evidence already present on its slopes, was placed in a category that put it outside the information chain, reaching the people it was most relevant to. The 1958 waterline, at 524 meters, sits alongside the geologist's pre-event findings as 2 descriptions of the same place, one prospective and one retrospective, separated by the decision about which filing cabinet the first one belonged in. Don Miller's 1960 paper, Giant Waves in Lituya Bay, Alaska, changed how the scientific community understood the upper range of what water can do. Before it, there was no formal category in the hazard literature for waves generated by sudden mass displacement into a confined basin. The localized, extreme, rock-slide-driven wave that Lituya Bay specialized in had no established framework. Miller's paper provided the measurements, the mechanism, the historical documentation, and the geological conditions. It was cited by researchers across seismology, oceanography, and civil engineering in the years that followed, and became the primary basis on which subsequent investigations of similar geological profiles were conducted. The paper created the vocabulary. The vocabulary created the research program. The research program eventually identified Tan Fjord, Aknes in Norway, and other locations as carrying the same setup, before any of them produced an event comparable to what Lituya Bay had been producing for centuries. There is a separate file on this channel on the Tan Fjord megatsunami. In October of 2015, a rock slide generated a wave that reached 193 meters on the opposite slope. The fjord was uninhabited. No one died. The geological profile of Tan Fjord, steep walls, glacially oversteepened, fault adjacent, with prior wave evidence on the slopes, is not meaningfully different from the profile the pre-event fieldwork described in the early 1950s. Worth pulling after this one. Back to the case. I cross-referenced the geological literature on fjord systems with comparable profiles across coastal British Columbia, Norway, and southern Alaska. The same combination of conditions appears repeatedly. A transform or thrust fault running adjacent to a glacially oversteepened headwall, a confined basin below, sediment layers in the basin showing high-energy depositional events. Several of these locations had been identified in the survey literature before 2015. None carried a regulatory hazard designation at the time of identification. The classification that would require one didn't exist as a formal regulatory concept until Miller's 1960 paper created the scientific framework to define it. Lituya Bay generated the largest wave ever measured. It also generated the science that made measuring this class of event coherent, and the research program that eventually identified where similar events were likely to recur. So where does that leave the file? Confirmed, on the physical and documentary record, a magnitude 7.9 earthquake on July 9, 1958, triggered a rock slide of approximately 30 million cubic meters into the northern arm of Lituya Bay. The resulting wave reached 524 meters, the highest recorded wave height in history. 3 vessels were in the bay. The Edry and the Sunmore survived with all occupants. The Badger was found beached. Orville and Mickey Wagner were never recovered. The pre-event survey established bear scars from at least 4 prior wave events dating to 1853. The post-event paper, Giant Waves in Lituya Bay, Alaska, published in 1960, established the scientific framework for the study of landslide-generated megatsunamis. All of this is on the confirmed record. What is theorized, with strong but not universal agreement, is the precise run-up height of the pre-1958 events. The field estimates for the 1853 and 1936 events were made before the methodology for precise run-up measurement had been standardized. They are accepted as reasonable approximations without having been independently verified to the same standard as the 1958 figure. What is genuinely unresolved is the timing of the next event. The Fairweather Fault remains active. The slopes above the northern reach carry oversteepened, fractured rock that has been accumulating seismic stress since 1958. The inlet's sediment record shows recurrence on a timescale of decades, not centuries. Lituya Bay is still used as shelter by vessels seeking protection from Gulf of Alaska conditions. The 1960 paper is in the scientific literature, and the hazard is noted in navigation guides derived from its findings. Whether that language reaches every vessel that moors in the northern arm on a night when a large earthquake moves the Fairweather Fault is the question the record cannot close. Not because the information doesn't exist, but because the distance between a geological field report and the person anchored inside the fjord it describes has never been fully bridged. The bare line at 524 meters is still on the slope. The rock above it is still fractured. The fault is still accumulating the strain it releases when it moves. The bay has not changed the conditions that produce what it produces. It has simply not yet had the earthquake that carries out the next one. If working through a stack of unresolved files is your kind of thing, subscribing means you won't miss the next one.